true.
Not if reality is a complicated and ugly mess.
Ken, you got some splaining to do.
Explanation at its best. Next time on Philosophy Talk.
Listen to Philosophy Talk every Tuesday at noon on KSJE 90.9 FM, Farmington. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, which is officially baby-friendly. This evidence-based initiative is designed to support mother-baby bonding and optimal infant feeding practices by upholding the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. San Juan Regional Medical Center, officially baby-friendly, and serving the Four Corners since 1910. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com. Eleven minutes past 8 o'clock. It's Monday morning, September 30th. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Micklin, and thank you for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM here in San Juan County and now 103.3 FM in the Durango area. We're glad you're with us, everybody. Also, good morning to our viewers who are watching the program live today on the KSJE Facebook page and YouTube channel. We're glad you're with us as well. Coming up in just a moment, we are continuing our series on Mondays during Hispanic Heritage Month here in North America. And this morning, our focus is on immigration and immigration law. I'll be speaking with a member of the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center from Albuquerque. Adriel Orozco is joining me in the next few moments here on KSJE from his offices in Albuquerque. So we hope you'll stay tuned to hear some of the topics around immigration and immigration law in the next few moments right here on KSJE. Then, of course, at 8:50 this morning, we'll be checking in with Lewis Campbell from Synergy Computer Systems, talking technology. It's our Monday Reboot segment today here on KSJE. Next hour, Mick Hess will take us roving with the arts. Today, Mick is playing some Puccini arias, sung by the great Kiri Takanawa, coming up today on Roving with the Arts at 9:06. That'll get your Monday going, that's for sure. Of course, we want you to connect with us on all forms of social media so you don't miss a thing of what's going on here at KSJE. You can like us on Facebook, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and check out KSJE on Instagram as well. For weather forecast, we want to talk a little bit about that, too, because it's going to be sunny today here in San Juan County with a high of 82, clear with a low of 50, and that's the warmest we'll be for the next several days. It'll be sunny and 77 tomorrow, 70 on Wednesday, and look at the low Wednesday night down to 38 in Farmington, 78 and sunny on Thursday, 77 Friday, and mid to lower 70s for the weekend. And before we go, a look at the weather picture. We'll take you to Cortez this morning. Here's a look at downtown Cortez. Sleeping Ute Mountain in the background there. Currently in Cortez, Colorado, it's 54 degrees. They'll have a high temperature today of 77 and an overnight low today of 39. That's the forecast for Cortez, Colorado today. Joining me now through our visual radio technology to talk a little bit about the immigration situation in New Mexico and in the United States. Adriel Orozco is joining us from his offices in Albuquerque this morning. And Adriel, good morning. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You bet. I appreciate you being here. You work for the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, isn't that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to low-income immigrants in our state.
Okay. And so how long have you been working with them?
I've been here since 2012, as an attorney since 2016.
Got you. And so from what you see there, and from your offices there in Albuquerque, you reach out and help folks throughout New Mexico. Isn't that true? It's not just folks in the city, right, in Albuquerque?
No, that's right. We've served people from 20 of the 33 counties. Our principal place here is in Albuquerque, but we try to get out into other areas of the state. We've been in Farmington, we've been in Taos. We're trying to create more sustainable systems to get out into like Hobbs, into Deming, especially because we know people in the southern part of our state are a lot less mobile because of the checkpoints that we have. So we really try to be much more accessible to folks across the state, because one of our goals is really just to help as many immigrants find stability in our state as possible, particularly around assisting them with getting their immigration status.
Right. And so this is such a hot button topic, as I know you know, and it's so politically polarized, I think, or polarizing when we talk about this. But is there a way to talk about just the human issue of immigration and what some of these changing rules and laws mean for folks who are already living in our state and trying to provide for their families and that type of individual? Is that, I imagine, is the people that you deal with most of the time?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties around the immigration debate currently is that it really just focuses on border walls, criminals, and it really just thinks about the folks that sometimes when you think about your communities that you really don't want to be your neighbors, but there's so many other folks here in our communities who are immigrants who really just don't fit those profiles, or who might have had some contact with the criminal justice system, but wouldn't be the folks that you actually think of as criminals. And so our organization has sort of a multi-pronged approach with assisting folks get immigration status, and we primarily focus on humanitarian forms of relief. So folks who have been victims of a crime, of human trafficking. We work with abandoned, abused, or neglected youth so that they can get residency. So folks who are really put in a situation where they otherwise can't afford legal services. We work with asylum seekers as well. And so it's just really the folks that need a little bit more support, particularly because our immigration laws are just so complex, and really trying to get them into like a stable status. We also really have a strong citizenship program, so folks who are legal permanent residents already who are trying to get citizenship, because in New Mexico the only way to vote in our state and local elections is being a U.S. citizen, and of course in a federal level as well you have to be a U.S. citizen. So it's our way of trying to remove that barrier so folks can have their voice heard in our political system.
Right, right. Well, we always hear how folks who are here and who are already living in this country need to go through the steps to become naturalized citizens and go through the immigration process. And so maybe you can take us through, for the average person who finds themselves in this country and are working and contributing to society, what are the steps and how long does it take on average, I guess, to become a U.S. citizen if you are an immigrant? Right.
And so I think it's good for folks just to sort of understand a little bit that there are sort of two main ways of getting into getting status in the United States.
Okay.
One is if you're from abroad, you can apply to get into the United States. You can either get a non-immigrant visa, which is like a tourist visa, a student visa, and then you could also just apply to enter into the United States as a legal permanent resident. And so that's really a lot harder and to do. And so that's why you will see folks in our country who either had who are living undocumented, right? Sometimes there are just no paths to get into the United States, quote unquote, legally through the legal process. And so that's why you'll see millions of folks here in the United States without having gone through that process, because it's just a really limited process. And so folks here inside of the United States have several options. A majority of folks who get legal permanent residency in the United States, it'll be through a family member. So I was looking at statistics that in 2017, about 67% were able to get legal permanent residency, their green cards, through a family member. About 47% of those folks were able to do it through an immediate relative. So our government categorizes our relationships, our family relationships, and prioritizes some. So folks who have a parent, who have minor children, who have a spouse, those folks generally are put at the front of the line, so to speak, around the family-based portion.
Right, okay.
And so those folks can get something sooner if they meet the requirements. There are a few barriers that the law kind of creates for folks to be able to get status through a family member, especially an immediate relative. And those cases go relatively quickly. They can be approved within 6 months, sometimes a year, but they don't really take too long. When you hear about sort of the quote quote line and how long it really takes for other folks, those are folks who have family members, but those are non-immediate relatives. So you can think of those folks being siblings, adult children. If you're a legal permanent resident, you can't have immediate relatives, but you can still petition for family. So those are spouses of green card holders, minor children of green card holders. Those folks are non-immediate relatives, those family members. And depending on your country of origin, those cases can take 10 years, 15 years, even 30 years. Our laws haven't been significantly modified since 1986 to provide benefits to the immigrant community. And so we have caps that really prevent people from getting using those visas if they're non-immediate relatives for quite some time. And then again, there are other legal barriers that have been implemented since then that prevent people, even once they're able to get a visa, to actually adjust their status to become a legal permanent resident within the United States.
Got you. And then, of course, I guess the next step would be citizenship, correct, for some of these folks once they get that legal status to be here?
Yes. So once a person gets a green card, most of the time, folks can become a citizen after 5 years. In a limited amount of circumstances, people can become a legal permanent resident a citizen in 3 years. So it depends on whether they're married to a citizen and living with them. It also depends on how they got their residency. But I would say a majority of the time, within 5 years, a person can then become a U.S. citizen.
Right.
Of course, they have to meet the other requirements. For example, they have to have basic English language skills, or they have to be able to learn 100 questions related to the U.S. Government and our history. There are medical exceptions for folks who are unable to learn that information. So I've had clients who have the onset of dementia. I've also had clients who have depression, and they're just not in a place where they're able to actually learn that information. And so that's one important thing. Some folks think that if they can't learn English, or if they can't learn the U.S. civics exam information, then that they can't become citizens, and they can. There is an exception if your doctor is able to make a medical determination that you're unable to retain that sufficient information.
I see. Okay. And I want to ask you a little bit about the process that you mentioned that could take 10 years or longer. And so for folks in that situation, how are they living day to day? Is it a constant state of fear? Are they just worried that something could come up, even though they're kind of in line in this process, but it's going to take forever, or a long time, that they could be, something could happen to jeopardize this process for them? Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, well, so if a person already has an approved I-130 petition through a family member and they're just waiting for the visa to come up, that doesn't really give them any protection. And so some folks, when I meet with them, they ask me if that'll prevent them from being removed from the United States. And I say kind of yes or no. Sometimes ICE officers don't really know too much about the immigration benefits side. They know more about the immigration enforcement side. And so if they see that something's pending, they might just give the person the benefit of the doubt and say, well, keep on working on your process. In other circumstances, ICE officers know a little bit more, and then they'll say, well, that doesn't give you any actual authority to be in the United States, so, put them in a removal process. Or even currently, because under this administration, the rules have really given a lot of discretion to low-level officers. The officers will just say, I don't really know what that means. Going to put you in a detention center, and you can talk to an immigration judge and figure that out. And so having a pending I-130 doesn't give anybody real legal authority to be here. Even if it is approved, they have to go through the residency part to get that approval. And so, but I mean, I will tell you that, I've met plenty of clients who are undocumented, who've been here for quite some time, and I have talked to them about sort of being in this constant fear. And I think it just depends. I think it depends on the current policy that's being announced by the government. Earlier this year, there was talk about mass raids, and nothing happened. But there was a lot of mobilization for people to know the rights. But there was also a lot of folks just trying to understand their immigration status. And so what I always just tell people who have undocumented family members or might be undocumented themselves is talk to an immigration attorney, because just knowing what you benefit, what you can benefit for, or if you don't benefit for anything, at least knowing your rights is a really important thing, especially currently, just to maintain safety and family unity under this administration.
Right, and knowing your rights is an important thing, because some folks may feel, well, I'm here, but I'm an unnaturalized immigrant, and so I don't know if I have any rights, but they do, correct? And that's what you spend a lot of time explaining to folks as well, don't you, about what to do if a sheriff's deputy comes to your door or somebody is knocking on your door and things like that. These individuals do have a certain number of rights and responsibilities, I suppose? Yes,
and in fact, they have the same rights that we all do.
Okay.
The only difficulty there is when they kind of stop in some way, and so it's the government's duty to find out information if somebody is here from another country. And so what I've seen most of the time is that just somebody is talking to an officer and just divulges that they're from Mexico or they're from Ecuador or Honduras or something. And as soon as the government knows that, now the individual has to prove that they're here lawfully. And so as long as people don't speak to immigration officers, don't tell their national origin, don't give their name, then they can protect themselves. But the difficulty is that standard is just like, it's a really easy standard. As long as the person divulges that the information sufficient for ICE or CBP or an immigration officer to know that the person's not from the United States, then the burden now shifts back to the immigrants themselves to prove that they've been here lawfully. And so they do have rights, but the difficulty is exercising those rights and then knowing how to exercise those rights. I know that especially in rural parts of our state, with more conservative views from some law enforcement can actually be working with ICE to give some of that information. And so I know that here in Albuquerque, we've been working with some advocacy groups to limit the amount of information that, let's say, the county jail gets, like limiting the national origin information, just so that ICE can't scour the databases and then get access to that. And so there's different ways that local governments and communities can get involved to try to prevent that entanglement between local and federal government. If the local policy is to try to create more safety for their communities around immigration issues.
Right. My guest this morning is Adriel Orozco. He is with the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, speaking to me from Albuquerque via Skype this morning. And Adriel, tell me a little bit about the asylum situation, because we also hear a little bit about that. These folks who are traveling across Central America in many cases, and they end up on the southern border, and they're looking for asylum. We've seen a lot of issues at the congressional level about what that means, but this country has a long history of accepting individuals who are seeking asylum, and there are various ways to do that are under scrutiny, I think, at the moment. But what do you find in your work about these asylum seekers coming here?
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting when you think about the concept of asylum, right? A lot of folks are coming to the United States because they're seeking protection. They're in their home countries and they're being extorted by local gangs. Local gangs aren't being stopped by police officers, or in fact, local gang members have strong relationships with local law enforcement, and so there's really no recourse for protection. We've seen a lot of gender-based violence where women are fleeing situations of domestic violence with their partners, and of course are still unable to get recourse from local law enforcement. But when a person comes to the United States, and it's important for people to also know that there's no other way to seek asylum other than presenting themselves at our border. There's no application process from their home country for asylum in particular. There's a refugee process, but as we know, the government just recently limited the amount of refugees that we're going to be able to take in to 18,000. So that's a very limited process already, and difficult, especially when people are facing immediate danger, right? And so when people are presenting themselves at our border and seeking protection, they might not actually be seeking the type of protection that our laws are set currently to protect. And so people, when they present themselves, they can only get asylum if the persecution that they're facing is based on race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or being a member of a particular social group. So this law was actually implemented or created and enacted in 1980. So one interesting thing there is that sex wasn't included. And through case law, it was. And now what we're looking at is more about gender-based violence. But we know that our current government has made it really difficult for women in particular who are trying to flee violence by their domestic partners who are not being, and they don't have a recourse to get protection in their home countries. That has been severely limited for those folks, even though our court system and our precedential law was actually favorable to those situations. And so, I think a lot of times what I hear people say is that, like, why don't they fix their home countries? Or they shouldn't be coming here unlawfully to try to get asylum. And the thing is that, like, Honduras has the highest murder capital rate in the world. These home countries don't have the resources, and we know that some funds from our government to these triangle countries have been predicated on keeping folks there so that they don't come for asylum. But when you're facing real danger, people are going to leave. And I think there's the same thing in the United States. If you're living in a city that has a high crime rate, well, you're going to leave that city and go somewhere else because, you're thinking about your well-being, but you're also thinking about the well-being of your families. And so the difficulty currently is that the government is not preventing or is not allowing folks to be in the United States while they're going through their asylum process. And that's really difficult and hard because the border region in Mexico doesn't have the resources to be able to assist these individuals in going through the process. And we get calls all the time at our organization from folks who are in Juarez who are looking for assistance, legal assistance, but it's 4 hours away, and we already have a lot of our resources being consumed by assisting folks here in the United States, particularly because we're experiencing a lot more barriers in our cases. So a case that could have taken, 10 to 15 hours might now take 20 to 25 hours because we're having to put more resources into them. And so it's just really creating a lot of strain on resources. And so I think one of the stats I heard was that only up to like 1.5% of people who are being forced to stay in Mexico are actually able to get legal assistance. And so if they don't know what the process is like, what they need to do to present to the government, and the government's not taking the time to assist them in doing that, then folks are being denied asylum incorrectly, and they could otherwise be eligible for asylum, but they just don't know, and they're not getting the assistance to know.
I see. Interesting. And we sometimes hear too the argument of, well, if these folks are traveling through Mexico from these other countries that you mentioned, Honduras and some of the others, why don't they stay in Mexico, which is a safer environment, one would think, than where they're coming from? Is that another option for these folks, or not necessarily?
Well, we know that the asylum process in Mexico is not strong enough. There are not enough protections within that asylum process for Mexico to be considered a safe third country.
I see.
And so Mexico has indicated they want to put more resources into their system, but until it gets there, then it is not a viable third country option at the moment. And so some people do stay and live in Mexico, but we also know that there's a lot of violence and an ability for their country to control that violence. One story that I've heard is that shelters in Juarez are having to prioritize families with minor girls to get access to legal services because some of the younger women are the ones who are being kidnapped by some drug cartels or some crime syndicates and are being trafficked. And so we know that just the government right now in Mexico doesn't have the resources to protect their own civilians, and they don't have the resources to protect such a large number of migrants. And so our country, thankfully, we have a lot of resources. We have a very strong asylum program. And so, if you just think about it in the global context, we definitely should be using our resources and our wealth to be assisting some of these folks who are trying to just flee this persecution.
Right, and explain to me a little bit about when a family decides to leave their home country. This has probably been months or even years in the making to make this decision that staying in their home, what they've grown up in, maybe generations of their families have been there, but the conditions have just gotten so bad or so dangerous that they need to gather up their family and whatever belongings they can gather and make a change. Is that kind of the decision process that these folks are going to, or is it much more last minute and we just got to go and grab everything and get the heck out?
I would probably say it's a little bit, it's a mixture. I think
Okay.
It depends on the reasons why people leave. And I can just tell you a story from someone that I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks. It was a woman with a minor child. She had a small business just selling kind of like convenience store items on the streets and in the market. And she was being extorted by a gang. And for years she had been trying to pay them and just being right with those folks so that she wouldn't experience violence. But then she was having difficulty selling her items, and so her business was having a hard time, and she wasn't able to meet those extortive payments. And so she told them that, and they told her that they were going to go after her minor child if she wasn't able to get the payments. And so that's when she finally made the decision to leave. I've heard people who move to their parents' home or try to move in other parts of the country, and they just sort of experience the same things. And so I think...
And this was in what country was this story? Can you tell us?
This was in El Salvador.
Okay. And by go after her younger child, you mean harm or injure or something? Is that what you're thinking
so I've heard
they meant?
situations for usually minor boys, they'll try to recruit them to get into the gang. For minor girls, it might be that they'll rape them. And in other circumstances, I have another client where there was a gang member who was trying to be in a relationship with my client, and my client didn't want to be. She had been raped before, and she just was scared that she was either going to be killed or continuously raped. And because some of these smaller towns, the gangs have a lot of power, she can't go to police officers because the police officers will tell the gang members that she had been trying to report the person. And so I think the difficulty that sometimes people might not recognize here in the United States is that there really aren't that many systems to exercise your self-determination in some of these countries and to really protect yourself. Here,
Right.
we can potentially go to police officers if we're having a domestic violence situation, or if someone's trying to extort us. And in some of these other countries, there really isn't that option. And so if you don't have that option, what do you do?
Right. And I imagine a lot of these folks feel like they're backed into a corner and they need to do something.
Right. Uprooting yourself from your own home, I mean, that's a really big decision. And I think it's just when people are really put into that corner, that's when they finally decide to come.
Sure. Adriel, we have just a few minutes left together this morning, and I do appreciate your time and trying to give us some insight into these issues that we're hearing about in the news almost on a daily basis now. And sometimes what we hear is, though, that there are some folks that say, but some of these folks who are coming to our border, some of these folks who want to immigrate to this country are not the best citizens, or maybe they have a criminal background, or maybe they don't have minor children. And so is it important to do some screening, I guess, at the border and with some of these asylum seekers to make sure that they are who they say they are and things along that line? Is that an important thing for the government to be doing to protect the rest of us, I suppose?
The government already has a very strong vetting process. And so of course, I mean, you want to understand who's coming into the country, and I think that if the policy would be, how do we have a humanitarian way of addressing these issues in a way that we also are vetting folks appropriately, then that's sort of a different conversation. But I think the assumption that everybody or that a majority of people might be criminals or something, and then treating everybody that way is really rough, And I think that the detention system putting people in immigration prisons and treating them like criminals can be really rough psychologically, especially for folks who have so much trauma after having fled their countries. So yeah, I think that there's definitely a way of being able to have a system that's humane, but also, that there's an appropriate vetting process.
Sure. And I think that goes back to the problem with our laws in this country that haven't been updated, as you said, in I don't know how many years, 20 years, 30 years. And so
I think
that's an issue for Congress and the administration to deal with. But in the meantime, the folks who are, I guess, charged with enforcing these laws and protecting folks maybe against these laws, like yourself and your colleagues, are trying to interpret, and the judges, the meaning and how to make this all work, this square peg in the round hole, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And these are people's lives we're dealing with.
Exactly. And I think that some of the difficulty is that the federal government has taken a lot of discretion away from like judges to be able to make really positive decisions, especially in a 1996 law that criminalized a lot of acts by immigrants as a way to restrict immigration, because in the 1990s we had probably larger rates of immigration than we do currently, or we've had in the 2000s. And so the difficulty here is that we are having more discretion on the side of immigration to deny people entry or to deny people benefits, while commensurately denying the same system the discretion to give people benefits, especially if they're in a humanitarian crisis, or if they have U.S. citizen children here that depend on them. I think that sort of the way that things are being currently established is just really, really against the migrant who's trying to get protection. And I think that if we could just have a more balanced system, there could be more opportunities for folks to gain stability in this country. And I think that it would kind of harken back to the origins of why our immigration and asylum system was created. Our asylum laws were established after World War II. Because of the devastation that caused. And so I think if we can just think about what our role is in the global context, we can then figure out what our role is, what our laws and our immigration laws really should look like.
Sure. Well, Adriel Orozco, I can only imagine for someone who is leaving their home country with their children and all that they own because they can't trust the police, they can't trust law enforcement in their community if they're being extorted or harassed or victimized, and then come to this country and find a person like yourself or your colleagues that are willing to work on their behalf to help them make the transition and find a way to get into this country in a legal way. They must be overwhelmed and grateful for your assistance.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think a lot of people are just grateful, and I think that they're grateful in a lot of different ways. I know that when asylum seekers were being brought to Santa Fe and to Albuquerque, and now in Deming and Las Cruces, a lot of asylum seekers are being placed there. Communities do rise up. I do think that they're really passionate people in our communities across the state that are willing to help support people by providing them shelter, providing them items that they need. And so I really do think that there's a majority of folks here in the United States that want to address this humanely. And I think that our organization is just really here for folks who are otherwise unable to understand the immigration laws or unable to get an attorney. And so I think we all have our roles to play when we're thinking about the immigration issue.
That's very true. And unfortunately, I think you have some job security because this is a big issue, and there's a lot of folks who probably need your help. So thank you for spending some time with me this morning. I appreciate it very much.
Great. Thank you, Scott, for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you. That's Adriel Orozco. He is with the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center in Albuquerque, speaking with me right here on KSJE. Back with more in just a moment. KSJE is supported by the Farmington Civic Center, bringing a full slate of entertainment to Farmington and San Juan County. Musical of Musicals. It's a musical about musicals. September 25th through the 29th, presented by the Four Corners Musical Theater Company. The Farmington Civic Center, 200 West Arrington in downtown Farmington. Find out more online at fmtn.org/civic center or at 50